Huh? Oh yeah. Not every day, but every once in a while, yeah. One time somebody from, I think it was like the United Arab Emirates was watching. Yeah, watching it live. Because you can go through and you can check out the diagnostics of it. You can see where people watch it. I mean, a lot of people go find it after. You know, people just search for something and find it. Yeah. Hmm? No, you got to pay attention to the class. You can use it for warmth. You can cover yourself with paper. Yeah. Not so much. Every once in a while, I'll get a comment.
Do you ever get people that just hate you for something you say?
No, never. Which always surprises me because I do say a lot of like things that can be relatively controversial, but no one ever says anything. I kind of wish they would.
Yeah. Why do people get mad?
There's a few.
All the tubes.
Yeah, there are people that make good. There are people that make nice comments. Usually, I get thanks.
You should film.
That's a comment. Thanks. Like, all right.
You should film them all and sell them for AP.
That would be so
Technically
cool.
elected at Disney, technically leave you a bad comment.
Oh yeah, Disney was mad because I put on a clip of Winter Wilderness. Yes, and Disney was going to get me to get my YouTube account removed.
Why?
Because it's copyright. I had a clip of Wild Wilderness. Let's go take your notes out. Have you ever seen Wild Wilderness? There's a scene where they try to show like the Arctic, and they have. You ever heard of lemmings?
Yeah.
And the story about people just follow blindly like lemmings, and they said that lemmings will follow on their migratory path, and even if their path, the leader goes over a cliff, they'll all just jump over the cliff and not even realize in the story. That's where you get this thing. It's kind of a cliche, like a bunch of lemmings just following. Well, no, lemmings don't do that. They don't jump off of cliffs. But when they were filming it, Disney realized this rumor wasn't true. And so they actually show it on Wild Wilderness, all these lemmings jumping off to their death. Then they'll show you behind that the producers have these big fence things rigged up and they're pushing them off.
Are you serious?
So they killed about 1,000 lemmings for that film. Well, they'd be dead now anyways. It was 1953. Oh yeah, that one got really popular too. All right, so let's go ahead and take out your notes. There was a thing from Sports Center where they did their NFL show, and their entire episode they did references to the great movie Princess Bride. Okay. And they had all these references during the entire thing, and I posted a copy of it online, and it became a sensation. Actually, I'm not kidding. Thousands of people. That's what got a lot of comments. And a lot of people saying, "This is stupid," and other people, "You're stupid." That's pretty funny. And I can't show you a lot of comments because they involve words that I know you've never heard. All right, so back to the progressive. Like I said, the progressive you can't paint with one brush. I got through 5, and the progressives thought what about society? Yeah, they can fix it, but they thought only government can do it. And they thought, what kind of idea would not work? Yeah, laissez-faire wouldn't work because people have to get involved. Laissez-faire, only those on top will enrich themselves, even though they did agree with some of that. Yeah. Were we at number 5? Yeah. I think we just got to number 5. And I said government, they hated competition. I'm sorry, they liked competition, they're antitrust. Did we get, what was number 4? They had faith in what? Experts and
Search for order.
yeah, very good. They thought they could make this a rational society. 5, one of the things they thought was wrong was the political process. So they wanted to change the political process. And this is where you get one of the dichotomies, the contradictions. Change the political process. Good thing I wrote that down. The progressives were an interesting crew. They wanted, in one way, to give the voters more power. As they said, they want to make it more small d democratic. More small d democratic. So give the voters, I'm putting small d's here, not saying it's not the Democratic Party.
Did they say small d?
No. But I'm just saying to make sure if I said, because the Democratic Party is a proper noun, so it'd be capital. So I'm just saying Democratic as a common noun. Of course, if you're in Germany, because you know what the Germans are. Oh, I shouldn't say that, we're being broadcast. They're very small-d Democratic. So, we get bad comments from Germans now. You should try to sell stuff. I'm not reading. I'm a teacher, clearly. All right, so they're not democratic. And they thought to let the voters decide. But at the same time, they wanted to do two things that would actually restrict voting. They wanted to have some kind of qualifications for voting. Progressives weren't necessarily opposed to literacy tests. And remember, they're the ones who kept former slaves and then blacks afterwards from voting. But they wanted other things too. And they want to weaken the parties.
Why would that restrict voting?
We'll get to it in a sec. But they want to weaken the parties. I'll get to it. But they thought the parties, especially the machines, were not allowing voters to vote their conscience. So you get the voters who are more qualified voting, then they can make more decisions. They're hoping progressive decisions. And normally you see this as making it all more democratic, but that's simply not the truth. It's a dichotomy. More democratic by making it harder to vote. It's an interesting thing. 6. There's also a belief in this concept of social justice. Social justice. It's very similar to the social morality that the populists have, where community and people have to be intertwined. And what progressives would say over and over again, even they get kind of this another weird dichotomy, but society has a responsibility to all individuals, regardless of who they are. Not saying that everybody should be equal, not at all. But society has a responsibility. And this was a very pragmatic view that progressives had. Some of them, especially going into the 20th century, began to realize, finally, that the boom-bust cycle, that business cycle, can put a lot of people in poverty, even or at very little fault of their own. Companies aren't selling goods, so they fire workers. The workers are unemployed, not because they're lazy, but because there are no jobs. And therefore, society has a responsibility. And therefore, the opposite is true too. The individuals must have some responsibility to society. Now, and progressives would disagree on the best ways for both of these. And they did disagree. But that basic idea that we are not in this alone, that we're in a commonwealth and for the common good, is a very, very progressive idea. And obviously, this is not laissez-faire. Not at all. And so if you get all of these things together, there's a couple points we have to give for these basic beliefs. First off, all these 6 beliefs, they're very elite. This is a very elite group. Unlike the populists, that was bottom up and farmers, and they tried, at least they talked about getting workers. Not here. This is top down. It's a very elite middle class. They actually, in a way, look down on working people. This idea that you don't know what's best for yourself. That's part of the reason why they wanted to make voting qualifications more difficult and weaken political machines. Yeah.
Was there an all consensus on what this qualification should be?
No, not at all. The only qualification, or the only one that would eventually be a consensus in the progressive era was registration to vote. To make it more difficult to vote by saying you had to register before you ever voted. That's to limit people from voting. Yeah. And the only reason to do that is to keep people from voting. That's the only reason. Next. Not only that though, their overriding fear was not necessarily capitalism. It wasn't necessarily these political machines. Their overriding fear was they thought if we don't have these reforms, or we need these reforms, I'm sorry, to save capitalism from, and this is something that they were all worried about, revolution. Remember, the President of the United States was assassinated by an anarchist. There were anarchist assassinations all over, assassination attempts too. Heck, the Kaiser, there were 2 attempted assassinations on the first Kaiser of Germany and 2 on the second. There were assassination attempts on the Chancellor. It's all over Europe. Yeah.
So was this kind of similar to what happened in Germany when you did those reforms to stop socialism?
That's actually, the progressives really did look to what Germany did. To avoid revolution, Germany had reforms. And they had the first, for example, old age pension, national health care, to avoid revolution. The US didn't go that far, not till, never did the health insurance, really, completely. They did old age pension and the New Deal.
Why did health insurance never really get nationalized?
We'll get to it, but it was a combination. FDR made a few political mistakes at the end of the New Deal and then the Cold War.
Was it also to help businesses? Healthcare's nationalized, you can't.
Actually, it helps business. You don't have to worry about health insurance. But Cold War and then intense racism. The worry was, are we going to give insurance to blacks? That's what it was. That's how racist the country was.
Even after Cold War?
1940s and now politically. Okay, so at first these progressive reforms and these police will be tried out. I'm going to put down the local level. And what they was, literally, they thought they could do it in the neighborhood level. What the progressives thought is, if they could organize the people together into groups, bring order into chaos, they could solve problems at a local level. And this had limited success, but for the most part, generally failed. Because yes, you can organize and yes, you can make changes, but it doesn't change the overriding causes why there are problems. It more than anything else sticks a Band-Aid on. It sticks a Band-Aid, but doesn't really solve the disease, so to speak. And so, for example, that's where we get this social gospel. Christian principles to the market, Christian morality to life. What they thought is, if everybody operated under their vision of Christian principles, I got to be clear about it, since there's a lot of different groups of Christianity, a lot of different interpretations. It really depends on who they are. But what they thought is, we could do these Christian ideals and try to go away from the greed and the cutthroat nature of the marketplace. And of course, at the local level, they can't really do much. This is where you get, for example, the most famous of these new groups would be the Salvation Army. Salvation Army would start in Britain. Remember, they had the Industrial Revolution first, then spread to the United States. There would be other groups like the Salvation Army, but the idea is they would provide charity and help. But the problem was, it's going to be very limited. And in a bust, what happens to contributions to charity? They go down. Yeah. And that's when people need help the most. Because if there's a bust, there's fewer jobs because there's no demand. People aren't buying stuff. And so there's real holes in this. It is also out of this where you get that settlement house movement. And this idea was, if we could find a place where the urban poor, especially these new immigrants who have nothing, a place to live, and what the whole idea was of Hull House, the most famous one by Jane Addams. Hull House was James Adams. Hull, H-U-L-L. Jane Addams. If we could have a place where they know they can be stable and be fed, and out of the absolute chaos of living on the streets, perhaps the poor could have a start. They could provide food, shelter, especially for women. What happened a lot in urban areas is if the family was poor, the husband would just abandon the family. All the time. or abandon the children. They should be on the streets. And Hull House would take advantage of this. Not take advantage, try to alleviate this problem. And I didn't put this down in the book, I think just mention it. This is the era too of these kind of private orphanages, where families that they couldn't afford, or their family or something would happen to one of the people earning money, they just literally just kind of leave the kid there. They just go in an orphanage. Same thing for the elderly. Settlement houses were really important for the old folks because almost all people, when they got too old to work, they're done. They're completely impoverished. In fact, old age in this era became synonymous with poverty. Old age became synonymous with poverty. And so all of these things, the idea was we'll find a place for them. It's not like that today. Social Security has been the most successful thing in history. I might get someone complaining about that. Yes?
So in the budget was saying that they would try to get more rich people to stay at settlement houses too, so that they could see what it was like, but how would they have convinced people to come and stay there?
What they would try to do is, the book tries to sugarcoat it a little bit. It was more like the rich people could go there and experience how they live. And also, the rich people could go there and be a model for these poor. Look, they're rich, act like them. And this gets to the big thing about this. This is charity. And not only doesn't it work because I told you about the boom bust issue, it's never going to be enough, but charity has a big, all these reforms has a big social Darwinistic idea. That if we just convince people, teach them the right way to act, then they'll get out of poverty. Yeah, they're lazy people. But the biggest reason for unemployment is the market for jobs, the market for demand, or the supply and demand market in the economy. If people aren't buying enough stuff, companies shut their doors and people don't have work, no matter how hard people work. And so there's this social Darwinistic idea. So the idea about rich people, that really was to go in and you could say, look at them. I will be like them. Have you ever heard the saying, pull yourself up by your bootstraps? Have you ever heard that saying? And the idea was, you can do it yourself. No, actually it was making fun of this attitude. Because you can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Gravity gets in the way. Right? Try it. If you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, what happens? You fall on your face. They were mocking this idea that they just say, do it yourself in a modern economy. Which is really funny when people say that now. They don't realize that. No, it's actually trying to be, the word is ironic. Try it. We can do that for a test. If anyone can pull themselves up by their bootstraps, I'll give you 3 points extra credit. 3 points. Wait.
Semester, and I was like, yeah.
4 points extra credit for break the laws of physics.
Yeah. You have to wear your glasses though. Something bad might happen to them. All right, so back to this. I'll give you a good example. Have you heard of Madison Square Garden?
Yeah.
Where's Madison Square Garden?
Madison Square.
Have you ever seen 3D glasses? One side is red. Yeah, I'll show you. Thank you for taking them off. It'll be easier. I'm going to make everything to be 3D now. You see everything flat now? Not from now on. I know everyone without glasses is going, that's a great idea. Those of you with glasses are going, yeah, I don't know if I like this idea. All right. So, Madison Square Garden, now there's a new Madison Square Garden. But the first one, with this big arena that had boxing or circuses, held about 10,000 people. It was a fire trap. There was that one accident. There were no regulations then, so, would have been fun if a little spark hit. But somehow they survived. But one of the big charity events in 1900 was going to be to feed the poor. And this was going to be some of the richest people in New York City were going to buy chicken. And they would feed the poor. But this gives you the kind of social Darwinistic attitude they have. What they did is, on the floor of the Madison Square Garden, they put these tables up, and they kind of escorted in the poor. And they could eat chicken. And then the stands were filled with the richest people in New York City to watch them eat. That's weird. Yeah, it's creepy. And they could be like, oh, look, the poor folk eat. They eat just like us. Oh, they use their mouths. That is the idea of how there's a social Darwinistic thing. No, look at them. They're so funny the way they eat. Oh, they're hungry. I one time was an hour late for dinner. I'm hungry too. All right, so there's problematic. And so let's get to the realization hit pretty quick. It's going to have to be through government to do these progressive reforms. And so city government, still on the local level, and what they thought is, if we could just get rid of those political machines. Do you remember the term for political corruption in machines? Where they steal money.
Graft.
Yeah, graft. What they said is the machines were all graft. They're stealing money. Yeah, they did some good things, but the machines have a vested interest to keep people poor and dependent on the machines. So if we can weaken the machines, we can get real reform. Weaken the machine, therefore weaken the parties. Most city governments have a mayor-city commission form of government. For example, New York City has a mayor-city commission. And the mayor is the executive of the city. And the commission is like the legislature. That's how they do it. A major reform was they thought, let's make this a professional. And it's called a city manager commission form of government. So a trained, professional technocrat called a city manager would run the city. In fact, now it's a master's degree. It's called public administration. And so it's kind of a political science degree where you can go get one at UM. They have that program there, and get that master's and become a city manager. So it's a kind of combination of a number of different degrees, political science, a little bit of engineering, a little bit of administration. A good friend of mine did that, got his master's at UM, did that, and now he's the assistant city manager in Columbus, Ohio, which is a pretty big deal because Columbus is over 1 million people. I think it's 1.3 million. And so that's a big job. So he's kind of moving up, but they're not elected. They're chosen by the city commission as a trained professional. And then the commission is elected. Which one does Helena have? That's what Helena has. Helena has a mayor, but the mayor is more like the head of the commission. The mayor is the one who sets the agenda for the commission, but the mayor is essentially just another commissioner. There's a city manager in Helena, and the city manager was chosen by the commission, serves a term, and does the day-to-day management. And the whole idea was now we'll get a trained professional, and therefore they will look out what's for best in the city. Does it work? No. Yes and no. You know, you get a city manager who could be very good, but at the same time, they're not elected by the people. So potentially, a lot of places have tried it and gone back. They really tried New York City, but the mayor was just too strong. That's where they really wanted it. A lot of cities have this. And it would have limited success. There were some safety regulations in cities. You know, building regulations, crazy things like, have you heard of fire codes? Zoning laws, things like that. And those are progressive reforms. And so they put reforms saying buildings in the city must have a certain number of exits, must have a certain number of windows, etc. They must never come into to Capitol High, because we have a few rooms that clearly violate that. Yeah. You have a class in there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mr. Irby's, or I guess Mr. Irby's old room, number 1, doesn't have any.
Yeah, Mr. Irby's old room. It was Mr. Carter, and I loved having Mr. Carter. Mr. Mihalish and Mr. Sadler used to be in that one, but Mr. Larson. And they all complain about not having windows. And so I always complain that I don't have enough. All right, so they except for the most part, cities are still relatively limited. Next, state. So state level reforms, and Taylor, I'll get your thing about the parties. Oh, I forgot something. Forgive, Teresa, what? No, it's okay. I saw that dirty look you gave me. Also, what they thought was, if we could take the parties out of local elections, that will make the elections more democratic. And so they made them, it's called non-partisan. So there'll be no party for city elections. Now, New York, of course, never did that. New York, but, well, I mean, sorry, New York would eventually do that, what am I saying? But some cities still have the parties, but most cities are now non-partisan. Helena is non-partisan at the city level. The county's still partisan. But Lewis and Clark County, especially Helena, is mostly Democratic, and so they usually elect Democrats to the city commission. You know, they're probably Democrats even though they can't announce a party. But there's one Republican on the county commission, and she wants to turn the county commission to nonpartisan because there's more Democrats in this county. You probably see the same thing in other counties that might be nonpartisan, more Republican. But nonpartisan, no parties. So the idea is people would not vote based on party, they'll vote for what?
The person.
Yeah, the best candidate. All right, so next, states.
So when the nonpartisan started, did they have secret ballots yet?
That's coming in at state level. Some did, some didn't. Most states had secret ballots by about 1890, but even then, it was still pretty shaky on what kind of ballots they got. By the turn of the century, they had pretty good standard ballots, but they still weren't standardized. Did I say standard ballots, secret ballots? They weren't standardized.
So does that mean that like that workers could still be coerced into voting for a specific person?
It would be a much more subtle way of coercion. It would be more like they would all get a ballot and have one choice. For example, in New York City, a lot of neighborhoods would get a ballot that simply said Democrats box. In Ohio, Republicans, and that'd be their ballot.
So they didn't even have a write-in box.
Or candidates. Be like Germany. In Germany, you don't vote for the person, you vote for the party. And that was found. All right.
And come on.
So, state. And the state did a few reforms. Let me go through them pretty quick. The first one, more and more states wanted the Australian ballot. Correct? What's an Australian ballot? It's totally upside down. And if you flush the toilet, it goes counterclockwise. Correct? Yeah, it's obvious. Australian meant a secret ballot, a secret standardized ballot. And this still has not quite happened. The idea was so you wouldn't have, some voters would get one ballot and some voters would get another ballot to make sure everybody gets the same ballot to avoid little tricks they could play on the ballot, hiding candidates and things like that. It was a really common thing to have two candidates on one side and maybe turn the ballot over to see the other candidates. Or one ballot and you had to turn it over to see the other candidates. Hey, they're all on there. And technically, they won't do that, but every state, every locality has different ballots. So that hasn't quite happened. But most places would have a secret ballot. Next, registration. Registration. To make people register to vote before the election. Before the Progressive era, people just voted. They came in with some kind of proof of where they lived. It was pretty vague. They could vote. Now, the Progressives claimed the reason was to stop voter fraud. What the Progressives were saying was one person would vote in one ballot or one district, then run across town and vote in another one. Now, that almost never happened and never happens now. What they wanted to do is to keep people from voting. Because if you have to register a month before, it's easy to forget. If you're busy, you know, life goes on. And so if you can't vote or can't register, you can't vote. So it's to limit the people from voting. And the idea is simple. What they thought was, we'll keep people who don't care from voting. But the net effect is it lowers the number of people to vote. So whenever you see anything like this, that they want to make it more registration or early registration or more ID to vote, the only reason they do that is to limit the people voting. They want to cut the number of people voting. Next, it's going to be called direct, oops, I lied, not yet. They wanted primaries. Before the Progressive era, conventions, state conventions chose the nominees for president. So the leading Democrats in the state of Montana and the leading Republicans in the state of Montana would have a convention, and at this convention, the Democrats would choose their nominees for office, like governor or member of the House of Representatives or senator, and the Republicans would do the same, and other parties. But remember, we have a winner-take-all system, so we're kind of stuck with two parties. Well, the Progressives said the conventions were being controlled by these machines, by the party bosses. They would pick the people going to the convention, and they would argue with some justification that the actual candidates would be chosen by the bosses in what they would always say smoke-filled room. The idea is some little room off the convention hall, where of course this is 1900, everybody's smoking, and they would make the actual decision. So what they said is, let the voters choose the nominees. The voters choose it. Not everybody does primaries, but the voters would choose the nominees, so the Democrats would go vote in a ballot, on a ballot and decide, and Republicans. And Montana was a very progressive state, so Montana adopted this pretty early. So for example, the 2014 midterm election, the election is in November, but the parties had their nominating primaries in June. And so, for example, I voted in June. I voted in that nominating. So I picked the candidate. I picked my choice for the candidates for the different offices, if there were choices. And then I went to the general election. They ran against each other. Not every state does it, but most would. For the president, there would not be primaries that had any real impact until Democrats in 1972, Republicans in 76. This is on the state level. Next, recall. Oh, I'm sorry. Now we write down direct democracy. What the progressives thought is, if we could put more decision-making in the hands of the voters, we'll get more progressive choices. And so let's go through these pretty quick. Direct democracy. There's three types of direct democracy. The first one, the recall. Let the voters remove an elected official from office. There's already an impeachment process, but the impeachment requires some kind of criminal activity. States that have a recall, there's a petition, and if they get enough signatures on the petition, then there's an election. Hasn't happened in Montana for a very long time. In 2010, there was a recall to remove their governor, Scott Walker. It failed. It didn't get enough votes. 2002, California removed their governor by recall. And that was California has crazy recall rules. Not only did they vote to remove the governor, but on the same ballot, then they could run for governor again. And there was no restriction on who was on the ballot, so there were like 132 candidates on the ballot. All you had to do is say, I'm running, and you're on the ballot. And so they were actors, former actors, porn stars, strippers, some real politicians, all that. California picked a bad actor. It's a lot of steroid user. I don't know what steroid. Arnold Schwarzenegger?
Terminator's one of the best.
Arnold Schwarzenegger, he was more steroid than human.
I won't deny that.
He took everything possible.
Yeah, he wasn't arguing that he used steroids. He was saying he was a good actor.
Terminator's good because he didn't have to act. All he had to do was say 3 words. All right, next. The initiative. Am I right or am I right?
Probably
The original Terminator? Is that what you said? That's a good movie.
I know, they're making
Stupid.
they're making a fifth one. They're
Wish
making a fifth one.
Huh?
They're making a fifth one with Schwarzenegger.
Oh,
So, like, for the,
All right, so let's get this, I'm gonna get done with it. The initiative. And what the initiative was this, same deal. If the voters petition a measure, it can go to the vote, a vote. So for example, there's gonna be an initiative to, well, in Montana, they changed their laws to allow for more people to vote. So in Montana, right now, you can register on election day, with the idea being that'll get more people to vote. But there's a movement, mostly by conservatives, to move it back a month again. And that's gonna be initiative on the ballot next election, or that was initiative on the ballot.
What is
Didn't
that
pass.
argument?
Well, they claim it's to stop voter fraud, people voting multiple times, but that never happens. It just never happens. Unless you're in Butte. In Butte, dead people vote, but that's another story. Sorry, Butte.
A week from now, a bunch of people will show up. Like,
They'd have the voter rolls of people who had died and voted. Yeah. That's actually a pretty common thing. Next, a referendum. Same deal, but this time it's a measure that starts in the legislature.
Please excuse the interruption. A rep from Carroll College will be here today during lunch. Bring your lunch and join us. Your center is trying to learn more about Carroll. That is the bell. Thank you.
Yeah, they took off my old clock that had the big pin mark on it. Now it's a new clock. And by the way, you notice it's no longer connected, so it could have fallen down very easily. And I would have blamed. Yeah. I was going to say Mr. Mahelish, but it's you. All right. So referendum is a measure of the legislative vote. And for example, there's I think 6. The House, Montana State House and the Senate have 6 potential tax cut measures, and probably 1 or 2 might pass. And Governor Bullock is almost certainly going to veto. And so one of those measures, because there's a Republican majority in both the House and the Senate, they want to turn at least one of them to a referendum, so then the people would vote on it. And those are the issues. And all these, there would be some limited success, but one of the things, what happened to voter turnout because of all these measures? Went down dramatically. It did not at all work out the way they thought. What they thought was, we would limit the number of voters in the short run, and that would encourage them to learn and become part of the process. But the exact opposite happened. By making it more difficult, that discouraged people from voting. Directly discouraged them. Voter turnout was floating around 90% in 1900. It was down to 60% by 1920, and what is it today? In a presidential election, we're lucky to get 50. In the midterm election in 2014, it was barely a third of the eligible voters voted. People don't vote. I know there's people who don't even know what an election is. I know. And there's some scary way people vote. You would not believe how many people go in and they vote on one simple criteria. Anybody know what that criteria is? Huh? Yeah. Or it's either coolest name, or I'm the same, or I recognize that name, Johnson, something like that. I've heard of the name. I wish that wasn't true. I know some of you are thinking, what a cool way. I want to try this now. And how many yahoos write in things? That you're thrown away. Write in that. So don't even try to write in Donald Duck.
like how much.
Yeah.
I remember when I was a kid, two people voted for Donald Duck. Have a great day, everybody. See, are you hooked up now, Michael? You're welcome. You're welcome. Tomorrow? Wow, as soon as possible. Yeah. Well, North Dakota elected a dead governor. Yeah, he was dead. They elected a dead governor. Okay, we're gonna be. Yeah, okay, I can sign. See you next period. No, sixth period.
I mean, what was it? Oh, for the winter games, school, like, oh my God, like, for yeah, they were like, wow, like, how, like, how did that take? You have to go on to get that. I don't do anything to get that state. Yes. Like. How did your speech go? So you found. Oh, you only be interested in the you. Did you yell? All I was trying to do was say, hey,